This is the Convene podcast. Welcome to another Convene Talk. Barbara, do you want to go ahead and share more about today's topic?
Sure. Thank you, Maggie. I thought we would talk about a deep dive into networking that Freeman has released. And this is part of a series of surveys on trends in the industry that they've been doing for a couple of years now. And they decided to really just look closely at what attendees are saying at events and then comparing it to what event organizers have to say about events. And they've created a framework that they call the Xlnc, and that stands for Experience, Networking, Learning, and Commerce. And they've really this is the second or third time they've really looked at networking very deeply. And the title of this report is, and I'm sure Maggie will put it in the show notes, is Unpacking Xlnc: How to Architect Serendipity and Connect People in Meaningful Ways. And one of the big headlines, I think, in this report is that there was a really very stark difference in what attendees had to say about what they look for in networking and what event organizers say are kind of the top areas where they consider it to be their responsibility. And the number one thing that attendees say about networking is that they want to have event organizers bring them subject matter experts in their industry and help them to connect. And they also want meeting planners to determine the topics that they can network around. And when meeting planners were asked what they considered to be the most important, that was those kinds of things were at the bottom of their list. There were 10 or 14% that listed those as priorities. The number one thing, or things that I think will be very familiar to everyone, is it was like making sure there's time on the agenda, having activities where attendees and others and the exhibitors are likely to meet, and then also having gatherings in the evenings and parties. And the kind of the gist of the report was that, yes, those are important, they're very familiar, but that is just the groundwork. That after that, that people really want to be directed. And one of the things that was just, when thinking about the report is, like, one of the possibilities, I think, is that event organizers are just on autopilot, that they just get up, they just have done it the same way, that's what people expect, and they do it, and that people have always in the past found each other. But I did speak with Ken Holsinger, who's the head of data strategy for Freeman, and, he was just talking about the lost opportunity that event organizers have if they're only creating the space. And, we do talk a lot about serendipity, about like, oh, you go somewhere and you meet somebody and it's serendipitous. And he's saying you really can plan for serendipity if you know what people want. I guess the other big headline for me in this was that the change that people have been talking about between generations is really happening, and it's accelerated by the pandemic and the way that people have kind of changed, just being around people a lot, where they meet people. There's been a lot of change in technology. So I am gonna leave it at that, and I see that Michelle has something to say.
Thanks, Barbara. I feel like this really is a shift. I think planners got the message years ago to put more white space in the programs, and the 15-minute networking breaks weren't enough. So they did that. I think we've seen that change where there is more white space, but now it seems like attendees want them to do is a cross between a session and networking. So I think of it in my mind, it's what we do at Convening Leaders with session topics, at table topics, where you see not session topics, table topics. And I'm not sure whether those are in like networking breaks or whether they're a kind of whether they're part of the program, the kind of schedule where you get to pick what you wanna talk about with a group of people standing at a table. There are different topics, which I think is a good blend of the 2, but I do think that requires more work to come up with that other than just, like, creating those spaces in the program, and I'm speaking as somebody who hates, hates networking. For me, the last 20 plus years in this industry, I have imposter syndrome when I network at any industry events because I write for a living and edit for a living, and I'm now networking with people who plan events or who run destination marketing at big cities or small cities, whatever. And I recognize that's a very different day-to-day work than what I do. So for me, it's about being curious. I love to ask a lot of questions so I can learn more. I don't really offer up a lot about myself because I don't think people would find that particularly interesting. But my other big pet peeve about networking is it tends to happen in very loud and crowded environments. And I really struggle with hearing people in those environments and also speaking loudly enough for people to hear me. So I think those kind of receptions, networking receptions still always default to the loud music, you know, long lines at the bar to get drinks, and that to me just seems like I don't think young people, I don't even think people like my age really relish those opportunities. Jen, what are you thinking?
Lots of thoughts. A lot in this article really resonated with me, and I think the like clincher is the part where you said, Barbara, the by stopping there, event organizers are missing the opportunity to provide what the report called the most powerful networking variable, which is gathering people together around a specific purpose. And I think that's what makes the difference when it comes to good and bad networking experience like you're describing. Because 'Cause I'm a person who, like, I don't hate networking, like, it's actually, like, really it can be really enjoyable for me. However, I'm pretty extroverted. I feel like I've also been exposed to a lot of situations that have forced me to work through being uncomfortable and feeling awkward. Because I don't care who you are, networking can feel awkward and uncomfortable, even if you're the most extroverted person in the world. If the situation, like, it is what you're describing, which is it's loud, there's tons of people, but having that purpose, I think, is something or some common denominator that people can kind of cling to a little bit and use that as a jumping off point to start figuring out where they wanna start. I think it makes you less uncomfortable at the beginning is what really makes it different. I wanna share an example of how to do that I think is a good balance,
Yeah.
from an article that I wrote last year, which was actually about how we need to design networking a little bit differently for women, but I honestly think this could apply to really any situation, but especially for Gen Z. And this comes from an example and we'll share this in the show notes. This comes from an example of a study that was done at an IT conference where women had experienced significantly less success in networking than men. So they hypothesized that 2 barriers were to blame: locating and meeting new people, okay, and social barriers that make interactions difficult. Well, you could apply that to any group of people, right? I mean, those people exist everywhere, whether you're man, woman, young, old, whatever. So the researchers designed and tested a solution where attendees received a non-reciprocal list of potential contacts and introductions were made over email. Okay, interesting. We could equate that in a way to like dating with like Hinge and other apps. The result was a huge success. The number of new contacts women met increased by 57%. The time spent talking to those contacts jumped by 90%, and the number of LinkedIn connections they added went up by 29%. To boot, their odds of scoring a new job increased by a factor of 1.6%. Interestingly, though, those same interventions did not improve men's outcomes in the study, but we could say that due to this being an IT conference, there being more men, they had an advantage. However, I really do think that's a great example of how having those introductions made ahead of time over email and giving people a place to start, aka providing purpose, doing something with intention, kind of change this networking experience. And I do feel like that could be applied to any networking situation, regardless, man, woman. And I really think that could work well with a Gen Z audience because they are more used to doing things online and being online. Like that would be an excellent place to start. And I feel like I've seen more events that have that. They have those apps built in. They're already trying to get the ball rolling with the networking by encouraging people connecting on the app and then meeting in person. So I don't think it's too far off from what's already starting to happen and progress. But I don't know who wants to chat next, but have at it.
Well,
I've talked long enough.
I want to jump in real fast on that point, Jen, because this was a huge report. And I mean, it was like 80 pages, I think, 80 slides. And I so encourage anyone interested in this to download it because it's just replete with great stuff. But they addressed that. Sharing information in the beginning, like or before events, and so that people could be matched. And I think a lot of those matching programs seem very anemic to me. Like they might match you by your job title, but they don't match you by what you're wanting to learn. And that or like what your problems are. It's like what you might look like in the outside to people. And I feel like I am the biggest fan of BrainDate. I encountered them when they were just starting out, and for those who aren't familiar, it's really where they have sessions that there are organized around problems. Like if you say, "I'm interested in how to, how to get more in our industry, how to match speakers to my audience better," or "I'm interested in just anything," then they match you up with other people with those problems.
I think that's such a good example, Barbara. I think Great Data is genius. And like, again, it's such a great example of how connecting people via purpose and intention. What better way to do that? And I've experienced Brain Date. I did a little like test run with it not SEMA, but
Yeah.
Educon.
And that yes, and they experiment with all different ways, like small groups, big groups, and it's like, I think they're at Dreamforce this year. I
cool.
mean, it's,
Wow.
been writing in this industry long enough to remember when those matching programs were, like, huge deals, proprietary, and now these technology tools make it so easy.
I think some of this information is really helpful in terms of how you prepare your exhibitors if you have a trade show for success, because that's one of the takeaways is so we have Gen Z feeling like networking is too salesy. And we also have the need for subject matter experts. So one way to put that in practice on the trade show floor is to make sure that exhibitors have subject matter experts talking about their product or service to people rather than a salesperson trying to sell it to them, because they want to be able to have a conversation about, well, what does this mean? How would you use it? Where would you suggest that you use it for a specific application, whatever. They want to have those conversations. So I think some of this intel is really good, not just in terms of networking, but also in terms of how you design your larger experience. But I do think there's an opportunity to give people options about networking. Say, would you like to just, you know, have it be serendipitous and you meet who you meet? Or would you opt in for a program that's a little more scheduled, intentional, and you have more say in who you meet with? Barbara?
There was this wonderful little nugget that I thought was just the heart of the report. And I'll just read it. It says, "Here's the thing. Everyone networks for different reasons. For some, it's about inspiration. For others, it's opportunity, learning, or a sense of belonging. Purpose is personal. That means organizers need to understand who's in the room and what they're hoping to get out of it." And, they talk about research, about like doing research. And I remember this wonderful case study of a meeting where the event organizer thought that her attendees were extroverts and they needed a big party and that, they'd get more out of the meeting with the big party. So they had a big party and there was no bump in their satisfaction, and she just decided to ask them, Are you introverts or extroverts?" And they were like half and half. Like some were like, "I'm ambiverts." And so what they did the next time is they had a party, and they also had more of these like one-on-one, carefully curated ways where people could like, kind of ease into it. So I think that to me, like really was kind of the bottom line. And as Michelle said earlier, it is a lot of work, a lot of money, expense, a lot of investment in research and design to get to where you understand what people are there for and are able to give it to them.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, with that, thank you for the conversation. Remember to subscribe to the Convene podcast on your favorite listening platform to stay updated with our latest episodes. For further industry insights from the Convene team, head over to pcma.org/convene. My name is Maggie. Stay inspired, keep inspiring, and until next time.